The hallways of Riverside High School had already emptied for the day. The last bell had rung nearly 2 hours ago, sending teenagers rushing out into the warm afternoon, their backpacks bouncing against their shoulders as they hurried toward freedom. Now as the clock ticked past 5, the building had settled into its evening quiet, that special kind of silence that only comes to schools after hours. Maria Gonzalez pushed her cleaning cart down the empty corridor, the wheels squeaking slightly against the polished floor. She'd been working as the evening janitor at Riverside for just 3 weeks now. At 58, she was older than most people starting a new job, but life had taught her that new beginnings could happen at any age. The cart rattled as it rolled over a small crack in the floor. Maria paused to adjust the spray bottles and rags that had shifted. Her hands were rough and worn, with small calluses that spoke of years of hard work. She wore a simple gray uniform with Riverside Maintenance stitched above the pocket, and her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun at the nape of her neck. A few strands of gray threaded through the black, framing a face that carried both strength and gentleness. "Evening, Mrs. Gonzalez," called Mr. Rivera, the history teacher, as he emerged from his classroom with a stack of papers tucked under his arm. Maria smiled and nodded politely. "Good evening," she replied, her voice soft but clear, carrying just a hint of an accent. "Don't work too hard," he said with a friendly wave as he headed toward the exit. Maria watched him go, then continued her rounds. She liked this time of day, when the school belonged mostly to her. There was a peacefulness to cleaning the empty rooms, to restoring order after a day of teenage chaos. She moved methodically from classroom to classroom, emptying trash bins, wiping down desks, sweeping floors, and cleaning whiteboards. By 6:30, she had reached the arts wing. The drama room was already clean. The theater kids had rehearsal today, and their teacher always made them tidy up afterward. The art room took longer, with paint splatters on tables and scraps of paper scattered across the floor. Maria didn't mind. She found something satisfying about transforming the creative mess back into a clean slate for tomorrow's inspiration. Finally, she wheeled her cart to the last room on her evening route, the music room. This one was her favorite. The music room was larger than the other classrooms, with high ceilings that helped create perfect acoustics. Instrument cases lined the walls, and music stands were arranged in a semicircle facing the teacher's podium. A row of keyboards sat along one wall for student practice. But what always caught Maria's eye was the grand piano. It stood in the corner by the windows, its polished black surface gleaming even in the dim evening light. It wasn't new. The school had owned it for nearly 30 years, but it was well maintained and beautiful. A Steinway, Maria had noted on her first day, running her fingers lightly over the manufacturer's name. Tonight, as always, she saved the piano for last. She dusted the other surfaces first, swept the floor, emptied the trash, and cleaned the whiteboard where musical notations were scribbled in dry erase marker. Then, with her official duties complete, she approached the piano. For a moment, she simply stood looking at it. Then, glancing toward the door to make sure no one was watching, she carefully lifted the fallboard that covered the keys. The black and white keys seemed to invite her touch. Maria hesitated, then gently ran her fingertips across them without pressing down hard enough to make a sound. She closed her eyes, remembering. The security camera in the upper corner of the room hummed softly as it rotated, its lens capturing Maria's moment with the piano. In the school's security office, the monitor displayed the feed, but no one was watching. The footage was simply being recorded as it was every day. The next evening followed much the same pattern. Maria cleaned the classrooms methodically, working her way toward the music room. Again she finished her duties, and again she found herself drawn to the grand piano. This time she allowed herself to press one key very softly. The note rang out, clear and pure, in the empty room. She quickly closed the fallboard and returned to her cart. By the end of her first week, Maria had established her routine. The other staff rarely noticed her. She was just the quiet cleaning lady who spoke little English. Or so they assumed. Only Mr. Rivera, the history teacher, and Mrs. Chen, the cafeteria manager, made a point of greeting her each day. "I see you like the piano," Mrs. Chen commented one afternoon when she happened to pass the music room and spotted Maria standing by the instrument. Maria startled slightly. "It is very beautiful," she said, her words careful and measured. "Do you play?" Mrs. Chen asked. Maria shook her head. No. Just clean. She picked up her duster and moved away from the piano, focusing intently on a nearby shelf. Mrs. Chen nodded and continued on her way, but she gave Maria a curious glance over her shoulder. As her second week began, Maria became more comfortable at Riverside. She learned the rhythms of the school, which teachers stayed late, which rooms got the messiest, how to time her cleaning to avoid the after-school clubs. She also learned which hallways to avoid when the principal was giving tours to prospective parents or school board members. Ms. Peterson, the music teacher, began staying later than usual that week, preparing for the upcoming spring concert. Maria would clean the other rooms first and return to the music room after Ms. Peterson had gone. But on Thursday evening, Maria was running behind schedule after having to clean up a spill in the science lab. She cautiously pushed her cart into the music room, hoping to work quietly while Ms. Peterson finished her preparation. The music teacher was sitting at her desk, surrounded by sheet music. She glanced up as Maria entered. She was in her mid-40s with sharp features and blonde hair cut in a precise bob. Her reputation among the students was intimidating. She demanded excellence and had little patience for those who didn't practice. "Oh, you can come back later," Ms. Peterson said, barely looking up from her work. "Is okay. I be quiet," Maria responded, keeping her voice low. She began her cleaning routine on the far side of the room, trying to stay out of the teacher's way. Ms. Peterson sighed heavily and gathered her papers. "I'll finish in the teacher's lounge," she said, standing and collecting her things. "Just be careful around the instruments, please. Especially the piano. It's worth more than you make in a year." Maria nodded, keeping her eyes down as the teacher left. When the door closed behind Ms. Peterson, Maria's shoulders relaxed slightly. She continued cleaning, but found herself moving more carefully, conscious of the teacher's warning. When she finished her regular duties, Maria stood for a moment looking at the piano. Tonight, she simply gave it a thorough dusting and moved on. The following Monday, a notice appeared on the staff bulletin board. Annual Faculty Talent Show, Friday evening. Fundraiser for Music Department. Maria paused to look at the colorful flyer as she emptied the trash in the teacher's lounge. Various staff members had signed up to perform. Mr. Rivera would be doing a comedy routine. The gym teachers had formed a barbershop quartet, and Ms. Peterson would accompany several performances on the piano. Maria had just finished reading when the lounge door opened and Principal Winters entered. He was a tall man with kind eyes and a voice that somehow managed to be both gentle and authoritative at the same time. "Ah, Mrs. Gonzalez, how are you settling in?" he asked, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "Very good, thank you," Maria replied with a polite smile. He nodded toward the flyer. "Will you be attending our talent show? It's quite entertaining, I promise." "Maybe," Maria said. "If finished cleaning in time, well, I hope you can make it. The music department could use the support." He smiled warmly before continuing to his office. That evening, Maria cleaned the music room while Ms. Peterson practiced a difficult passage on the piano. The music filled the room, a piece by Chopin that Maria recognized immediately. She paused in her sweeping, listening as Ms. Peterson struggled with a particularly complex section. When the teacher hit a wrong note for the third time, she slammed her hands down on the keys in frustration. The discordant sound echoed through the room. Ms. Peterson glanced up and seemed startled to see Maria watching. "Still here?" Ms. Peterson asked, her tone sharp. "Yes, almost done," Maria said, quickly resuming her sweeping. Ms. Peterson closed the sheet music with a sigh. "This piece is giving me fits, and I need to accompany 3 different acts with it on Friday." She stood and gathered her things. "Just make sure you lock up when you're finished." After the teacher left, Maria finished cleaning, then stood looking at the piano for a long moment. The sheet music was still there, open to the piece Ms. Peterson had been practicing. Maria recognized Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor, one of her favorites. She glanced toward the door, then at the security camera in the corner. Its small red light blinked steadily. Maria hesitated, then turned away from the piano and pushed her cart toward the exit. But at the doorway she paused and looked back. The moonlight streaming through the windows cast a silvery glow on the grand piano. It seemed to be waiting for someone to bring it to life. Maria stood for a long moment, torn between caution and longing. Finally, with a small sigh, she turned off the lights and closed the door. But as she walked down the empty hallway, pushing her cleaning cart ahead of her, a plan was slowly forming in her mind. The week continued with its familiar rhythm, but something had shifted in Maria. Each evening as she cleaned the school, her thoughts kept returning to the piano in the music room. It had been so long, too long, since her fingers had danced across piano keys. Sometimes at night in her small apartment, she would sit at her kitchen table and move her fingers in the air, playing invisible melodies that only she could hear. Wednesday afternoon brought heavy rain that drummed against the school's windows and turned the parking lot into a sea of puddles. The weather had put everyone in a gloomy mood. Even the usually cheerful Mr. Rivera merely nodded to Maria as he hurried past, his arms full of history essays that needed grading. "Terrible day," he muttered. "Don't stay too late, Mrs. Gonzalez. They're saying the storm will get worse tonight." Maria smiled and thanked him for the warning. She liked Mr. Rivera. Unlike some of the other teachers, he always seemed to see her, really see her, not just the uniform she wore or the mop she pushed. The rain had meant indoor recess, which in turn meant extra work for Maria. Muddy footprints tracked through the hallways, and the cafeteria floor was a disaster after hundreds of restless kids had been confined there during lunch hour. She worked steadily, moving from the main entrance toward the back of the building, leaving clean floors in her wake. By 6 o'clock, the school was empty except for a few dedicated teachers working late in their classrooms. Maria had just finished cleaning the boys' bathroom near the gym, always her least favorite task, when she heard faint music coming from down the hallway. Someone was playing the piano in the music room. She wheeled her cart closer, moving quietly. The door to the music room stood partially open, and through the gap she could see Ms. Peterson sitting at the grand piano. The music teacher was still struggling with the same Chopin piece, and frustration was evident in her rigid posture. As Maria watched, Ms. Peterson stopped playing mid-phrase and flipped back a page in the sheet music. "This passage is impossible," she muttered to herself, unaware of Maria's presence. Maria stood silently, listening as Ms. Peterson attempted the difficult section again. The teacher's technique was competent but mechanical, lacking the emotional depth the piece required. When she fumbled the same set of notes for the third time, Ms. Peterson slammed the fallboard down over the keys. "Impossible," she repeated, standing up from the bench. Maria quickly pushed her cart past the door before Ms. Peterson could spot her. She busied herself with cleaning the water fountain until the music teacher emerged from the room, her face tight with frustration as she marched down the hallway toward the teacher's lounge. For several minutes, Maria continued her work, moving methodically from the water fountain to the bulletin boards, removing outdated notices and wiping away fingerprints from the glass cases displaying student artwork. But all the while she was aware of the empty music room waiting just a few doors down. Finally, after glancing up and down the deserted hallway, Maria wheeled her cart into the music room. The space felt different somehow, the air still vibrating with Miss Peterson's frustrated attempts at Chopin's masterpiece. The sheet music remained on the piano, the pages open to the challenging passage. Maria went through her usual cleaning routine, dusting the shelves, wiping down the chairs, sweeping the floor. But tonight she kept looking over at the piano, drawn to it even more strongly than before. When her regular duties were complete, she stood for a long moment, just watching the rain streak down the windows behind the magnificent instrument, making a decision. Maria walked over and carefully sat down on the edge of the bench. It felt both strange and familiar to be sitting at a piano again after so many years. She lifted the fallboard, revealing the keys that gleamed ivory and ebony in the room's soft lighting. For a moment she simply looked at them. Then slowly, she positioned her hands above the keys, her muscle memory guiding her fingers to their proper places. She didn't touch the keys yet, just held her hands there, feeling the ghost of music beneath her fingertips. The rain pounded harder against the windows, creating a natural soundtrack of its own. It was unlikely anyone would hear her if she played just a few notes. Maria gently pressed down on a single key. The clear tone rang out, beautiful and pure. She played another note, then another, slowly at first, then with increasing confidence. Her fingers remembered what her mind had tried to forget, the joy of creating music. Maria wasn't looking at the sheet music. She was playing from memory, a simple melody she had learned as a child, long before Chopin had entered her life. So lost was she in the music that she didn't notice the door opening wider or the figure standing in the doorway. What are you doing? Ms. Peterson's sharp voice cut through the melody like a knife. Maria's hands jerked away from the keys as if burned. She stood up so quickly that the bench scraped loudly against the floor. I asked what you think you're doing, Ms. Peterson repeated, stepping into the room. Her eyes were cold with anger. I'm sorry, Maria said, moving away from the piano. Just cleaning. That didn't look like cleaning to me. Ms. Peterson's voice was cutting. That looked like someone touching an expensive instrument they have no business playing. Maria's cheeks flushed with shame. But there was something else there, too. A flicker of pride that refused to be extinguished. I not harm piano, she said, her accent becoming more pronounced in her discomfort. That's not the point. Ms. Peterson moved to the piano and closed the fallboard with unnecessary force. This is a $30,000 instrument, not a toy for the custodial staff to play with when no one's looking. The words stung more than Maria wanted to admit. She had been called many things over the years. Immigrant, refugee, cleaning lady, but never had anyone dismissed her musical ability so completely, so thoughtlessly. I understand, Maria said quietly, her eyes downcast as she moved back to her cleaning cart. It won't happen again. See that it doesn't, Ms. Peterson replied. I've got enough to worry about with the talent show on Friday without having to check if the instruments have been damaged. Maria nodded, keeping her eyes on her cart as she arranged the cleaning supplies with trembling hands. She could feel Ms. Peterson watching her, the teacher's disapproval filling the room like a physical presence. I need to lock up now, Ms. Peterson finally said. Are you finished in here? Yes, Maria replied, her voice barely above a whisper. All done. She pushed her cart toward the door, passing Ms. Peterson without making eye contact. In the hallway, she could hear the music teacher locking the door behind her, the click of the key in the lock sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet corridor. Maria continued her rounds, finishing the few remaining rooms with mechanical efficiency. Her earlier joy had vanished, replaced by a hollow feeling in her chest. It wasn't just the humiliation of being caught and scolded like a child. It was the painful reminder of all she had lost: her home, her career, her identity as a musician. Outside, the storm had intensified. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the darkened classrooms as Maria worked. The thunder that followed seemed to echo her turbulent emotions. By the time she finished her shift, the rain had turned to a light drizzle. Maria loaded her supplies into the storage closet and signed out in the maintenance log. As she walked to her car in the nearly empty parking lot, she noticed a light still on in the music room. Through the window, she could see Ms. Peterson sitting at her desk, surrounded by papers, likely still working on preparations for Friday's talent show. Maria drove home slowly, her windshield wipers pushing away the last of the rain. Her small apartment was on the third floor of an aging building on the east side of town. It wasn't much. A tiny kitchen, a living area just big enough for a second-hand sofa, a bedroom that barely fit her bed, and a bathroom with temperamental plumbing. But she had made it home, with carefully chosen curtains and plants on every windowsill. The one luxury she had allowed herself was a keyboard, not a fancy one, just a basic model she had found at a yard sale 2 summers ago. It sat on a folding table against the wall, covered with a cloth when not in use. Maria had only played it a handful of times since buying it. Sometimes the music brought back too many memories, too much pain. Tonight, though, she felt drawn to it. After changing out of her work clothes and making a simple dinner of soup and bread, Maria sat down on the folding chair in front of the keyboard. She removed the cloth cover and ran her fingers lightly over the plastic keys. It was nothing like the grand piano at school, but it was hers. She began to play, softly at first, mindful of her neighbors, then with growing confidence. The Chopin piece that had given Ms. Peterson so much trouble flowed from Maria's fingers as naturally as breathing. Where the teacher had struggled with technique, Maria infused each note with emotion, bringing the music to life in a way that only comes from true understanding. As she played, Maria's mind wandered back through the years, to concert halls and music academies, to standing ovations and glowing reviews, to everything she had been before life had taken an unexpected turn, to the woman she still was underneath the janitor's uniform. When she finally stopped playing, the small apartment seemed unusually quiet. Maria closed the keyboard and covered it again with the cloth. Tomorrow was another day. She would return to Riverside High School, push her cleaning cart, and avoid the music room as much as possible. She would keep her head down and her thoughts to herself. But as she prepared for bed, Maria found herself thinking about the faculty talent show on Friday night. A plan was taking shape in her mind. Risky, perhaps even foolish, but increasingly difficult to ignore. What if, just once, she showed them who she really was? Thursday morning dawned clear and bright, the storm of the previous night leaving behind puddles that sparkled in the sunlight. Maria woke early, as was her habit. She sat at her small kitchen table with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The apartment was quiet except for the occasional hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic beginning to build as the city came awake. Maria had slept poorly, her dreams filled with pianos that disappeared when she tried to play them in concert halls where no one could see her. She felt tired, but there was a strange energy humming just beneath her skin. The confrontation with Ms. Peterson kept replaying in her mind. This is a $30,000 instrument, not a toy for the custodial staff to play with. The words had cut deep, not because they were particularly cruel, but because they revealed how completely invisible Maria had become. Ms. Peterson hadn't seen a person with a history, with talent and training and passion. She had seen only a janitor, someone who cleaned floors and emptied trash, someone who had no business touching a piano. Maria finished her coffee and got ready for her day. Before Riverside High School, she worked mornings at a local grocery store, stocking shelves from 7 until noon. The owner, Mr. Patel, was kind and paid fairly, and the work wasn't difficult. Like her evening job at the school, it allowed Maria to be mostly invisible, which had seemed like a blessing for a long time. Today, though, as she arranged cans of soup and boxes of pasta on the shelves, Maria found herself wondering if there might be more to life than hiding. The thought scared her. She had spent years carefully building walls around her past, creating a simple life where no one asked too many questions. Breaking those walls down would be risky. "You seem distracted today, Mrs. Gonzalez," Mr. Patel commented as he passed by with a clipboard. "Everything okay?" Maria smiled. "Yes, fine. Just thinking." He nodded and continued down the aisle, but his simple observation stayed with her. Was she that easy to read? Or was Mr. Patel just unusually perceptive? By noon, Maria had finished her shift. She ate a quick lunch in her car before driving to Riverside High School. She wasn't scheduled to start cleaning until 3, but today was different. Today she had a plan. The school day wouldn't end for another 3 hours, so the hallways were quiet, with students safely behind closed classroom doors. Maria made her way to the administrative offices where the school secretary, Mrs. Diaz, sat typing at her computer. "Mrs. Gonzalez." Mrs. Diaz looked up with surprise. "You're early today." "Yes," Maria said, summoning her courage. "I wonder if I could speak with Principal Winters." "Just for a minute." Mrs. Diaz raised her eyebrows. "He's in a meeting right now, but he should be free in about 20 minutes. Is everything all right?" "Fine, yes," Maria assured her. "I can wait." Mrs. Diaz gestured to a row of chairs against the wall. "Have a seat. I'll let him know you're here when he's available." Maria sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. What was she doing? She should leave now. Forget this foolish idea, go back to being invisible. But something kept her rooted to the chair, a determination she hadn't felt in years. 25 minutes later, Principal Winters emerged from his office with 2 men in business suits. They shook hands in the doorway before the visitors departed. Principal Winters turned to Mrs. Diaz. "Any messages?" "Mrs. Gonzalez would like to speak with you," Mrs. Diaz replied, nodding toward where Maria sat. Principal Winters looked surprised but smiled warmly. "Of course. Come in, Mrs. Gonzalez." Maria followed him into his office, a spacious room with large windows overlooking the school grounds. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with educational texts and framed photographs. Principal Winters gestured for her to take a seat in front of his desk. "What can I do for you today?" he asked, his tone friendly but curious. Maria took a deep breath. "It's about the talent show tomorrow night." "Ah, yes. I hope you'll be able to attend. It's always a fun evening, and the proceeds go to a good cause." "Actually," Maria said, her mouth suddenly dry, "I was wondering if I could participate." Principal Winters blinked, clearly taken aback. "Participate? In the talent show?" Maria nodded, her hands twisting together nervously in her lap. "Well, that's unexpected," he said carefully. "The performers are typically faculty members, but I suppose there's no rule against support staff participating." He leaned forward slightly. If you don't mind my asking, what is your talent, Mrs. Gonzalez? I play piano, Maria said simply. Oh. Principal Winters looked even more surprised. I see. And what piece were you thinking of performing? Chopin. Ballade number 1 in G minor. Principal Winters' eyebrows shot up. That's quite an ambitious piece. Are you sure? It's rather advanced. Maria met his gaze steadily. Yes, I'm sure. He studied her for a moment as if seeing her for the first time. The program is already set, but he glanced down at a paper on his desk. Actually, Mrs. Lee from the math department just called in sick this morning. She was going to do a comedy routine. I suppose we could slot you in her place. He looked up again. The show starts at 7. Can you be ready by then? Maria nodded, relief and anxiety washing over her in equal measure. Yes, thank you. Principal Winters smiled. Well, this will certainly add some variety to our show. I look forward to hearing you play, Mrs. Gonzalez. As Maria left the office, she felt both lighter and heavier. Lighter because she had taken a step toward reclaiming a part of herself. Heavier because now there was no turning back. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Maria went about her cleaning duties mechanically, her mind elsewhere. She avoided the music room entirely, not wanting to encounter Ms. Peterson before tomorrow night. When her shift ended, she drove home with her heart pounding in her chest. What had she done? After years of hiding, of being invisible, she had voluntarily put herself in the spotlight. Part of her wanted to call Principal Winters and cancel, to retreat back into the safety of anonymity. But a stronger part, a part that had been silent for too long, refused to back down. That night, Maria practiced on her keyboard until her neighbors knocked on the wall, asking her to stop. She apologized and switched to practicing silently, her fingers moving through the familiar patterns without making a sound. Chopin's Ballade was ingrained in her muscle memory, in her heart. She had performed it dozens of times before in another life. Friday dawned bright and clear. Maria went to work at the grocery store as usual, but her mind was miles away. Mr. Patel noticed her distraction again, but didn't comment on it. At lunchtime, he surprised her with a small cake from the bakery section. For you, he said. No special reason. You just seem like you could use something sweet today. The simple kindness brought tears to Maria's eyes. Thank you, she said, touched by the gesture. When she arrived at Riverside High School that afternoon, there was a palpable buzz of excitement in the air. The talent show was the biggest event of the spring semester, drawing not only students and parents but community members as well. The proceeds funded music programs for underprivileged students, including instrument rentals and private lessons. Maria noticed immediately that something was different. Teachers and students alike were bustling through the hallways, carrying props and costumes for the evening's performances. The gymnasium was being transformed into a makeshift auditorium, with rows of chairs facing a temporary stage. And at the center of the stage stood the grand piano from the music room, carefully moved for tonight's event. Maria went about her cleaning duties as usual, but with each passing hour her nervousness grew. By 6 o'clock she had finished her work and signed out. Instead of leaving, however, she made her way to the women's restroom near the gymnasium. From her cleaning cart she took a small bag she had brought from home. Inside the restroom, Maria changed out of her gray janitor's uniform. She had agonized over what to wear, finally settling on a simple black dress she had purchased years ago for a cousin's wedding. It wasn't fancy or new, but it was dignified and appropriate for a performance. She brushed her hair, leaving it down instead of in its usual bun, and applied a touch of lipstick, another item rarely used these days. When she looked in the mirror, a different woman stared back at her. Not the invisible janitor who moved silently through the hallways, but someone with pride and presence. Maria took a deep breath, tucked her uniform into the bag, and hid it behind the cleaning supplies in the maintenance closet. She would retrieve it later. By 6:30, people were beginning to arrive for the talent show. Maria found a quiet corner backstage where she could wait without drawing attention. Through a gap in the curtains, she could see the gymnasium filling with people. Students, parents, teachers, community members. Principal Winters was at the door, greeting everyone with a handshake and a smile. Ms. Peterson was also backstage, reviewing sheet music with several teachers who would be performing. She wore a formal black suit, her blonde hair pulled back severely. She hadn't noticed Maria yet, tucked away in the shadows. At precisely 7 o'clock, Principal Winters stepped onto the stage. The audience quieted as he approached the microphone. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Riverside High School's annual Faculty Talent Show. His voice boomed through the speakers, met with enthusiastic applause. Tonight, our talented staff will entertain you while we raise funds for our music education program. We have a wonderful lineup for you, singing, dancing, comedy, and music of all kinds. He went on to thank the sponsors and volunteers before introducing the first act, the Physical Education Department's Barbershop Quartet. 4 burly gym teachers in matching striped vests took the stage, launching into a surprisingly harmonious rendition of Sweet Caroline. Maria watched from her corner as act followed act. Mr. Rivera performed his comedy routine, drawing genuine laughter from the crowd. The science teachers performed a skit about chemical reactions that involved colorful explosions of confetti. Ms. Peterson accompanied several performances on the piano, her playing technically correct but lacking warmth. With each passing minute, Maria's anxiety grew. What if people laughed when she took the stage? What if she froze and couldn't play? What if years without a proper piano had dulled her skills more than she realized? She was so lost in her worries that she almost missed hearing her name. And now, Principal Winters was saying, "We have a special addition to our program. Please welcome Mrs. Maria Gonzalez, who will be performing Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor." A murmur of confusion rippled through the audience. Maria could hear the whispers. Who? The janitor? Is this a joke? For a moment she couldn't move. Then, drawing on courage she had almost forgotten she possessed, Maria straightened her shoulders and walked onto the stage. The bright lights momentarily blinded her, but as her eyes adjusted she could see the surprised faces in the front row. Ms. Peterson stood to the side of the stage, her expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. Maria approached the piano with steady steps. She sat down on the bench, adjusted its height, and positioned her hands above the keys. The gymnasium was completely silent now, the audience holding its collective breath. Maria closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to play. The first notes floated through the gymnasium like drops of water in a still pond, creating ripples of sound that reached every corner of the room. Maria's fingers moved with practiced grace across the keys, bringing forth the haunting melody of Chopin's masterpiece. For the first few measures, the audience remained frozen in shock. This was not what they had expected from the quiet woman who cleaned their classrooms and emptied their trash bins. This was not the simple tune or beginner's piece they might have anticipated. This was art of the highest caliber, performed with a skill that spoke of years of training and natural talent. As Maria continued to play, she felt the familiar sensation of losing herself in the music. The nervousness that had gripped her backstage melted away, replaced by the joy that came from reconnecting with a beloved old friend. She no longer saw the audience or thought about their reactions. She saw only the music in her mind, felt only the emotions Chopin had woven into each passage. The ballad told a story, beginning with that questioning opening, moving through moments of tenderness and fury, building to its thunderous conclusion. Maria's body swayed slightly as she played, her face reflecting the changing moods of the piece. When the music called for power, she delivered it without hesitation, her small frame somehow producing sounds that filled the entire space. When it required delicacy, her touch became feather-light, creating notes that seemed to float in the air. In the front row, Principal Winters sat with his mouth slightly open, his program forgotten in his lap. Beside him, several school board members leaned forward in their seats, utterly captivated. Students who had come only because their parents forced them now stared at the stage with wide eyes, witnessing something they had never seen before. The transformation of an ordinary person into something extraordinary through the power of music. Ms. Peterson stood at the side of the stage, her face a complex map of emotions. There was disbelief, certainly, and confusion. But there was also something that looked almost like fear, the fear of someone who suddenly realizes they have completely misjudged a situation, who sees their own assumptions crumbling before their eyes. As Maria reached the middle section of the ballade, where the main theme returns with greater intensity, a strange thing happened in the gymnasium. People began to cry. Not everyone, but here and there throughout the audience, eyes grew moist and tissues appeared. It wasn't just the beauty of the music, though that was certainly part of it. It was the story unfolding before them, the story of a woman they had overlooked whose depths they had never suspected. Mr. Rivera, who had always been kind to Maria, felt a lump form in his throat. He thought of all the times he had passed her in the hallway with nothing more than a casual greeting, never once wondering about her life beyond the school walls. Mrs. Chen from the cafeteria dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, remembering how Maria had once lingered by the piano, and how she herself had walked away without a second thought. In the back of the room, Mr. Patel stood against the wall. He had closed the grocery store early to come see his employee perform, curious about what had distracted her so thoroughly these past few days. Now, as he watched her play with such mastery, he understood that he had never really known her at all. The piece was approaching its conclusion now, the famous coda with its whirlwind of notes. Maria's fingers flew across the keyboard with impossible speed and accuracy, building toward the final crashing chords. The audience held its collective breath, caught in the spell she had woven. When the last notes faded away, there was a moment of absolute silence. Maria sat motionless at the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys, her eyes still closed. For a heartbeat, no one moved or spoke. Then the applause began. Tentative at first, just a few hands clapping. But it quickly swelled into a thunderous ovation as people rose to their feet. Someone shouted, "Bravo!" from the back of the room, and others joined in with whistles and cheers. Maria opened her eyes, blinking in the bright stage lights. The standing ovation washed over her like a physical force, bringing her back to the present moment, to this school gymnasium transformed into a concert hall. She stood shakily and offered a small bow, overwhelmed by the response. Principal Winters bounded onto the stage, his face alight with excitement and amazement. He took the microphone, gesturing for the audience to quiet down. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice charged with emotion, "Mrs. Maria Gonzalez." The cheering resumed as he motioned for her to take another bow. When the applause finally subsided, Principal Winters turned to Maria. "That was extraordinary," he said into the microphone, seemingly at a loss for more adequate words. "I think I speak for everyone here when I say we had no idea. No idea at all that we had such a remarkable talent among us." He looked at her with new eyes. "Would you mind telling us a bit about your background in music?" Maria hesitated, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She had not planned for this moment, had not thought beyond the performance itself. For years she had kept her past hidden, had reinvented herself as someone small and unremarkable. Speaking now would mean letting go of that protective invisibility forever. She glanced toward the side of the stage where Ms. Peterson still stood frozen in place, her face pale. Then Maria looked out at the audience, at the students who now watched her with respect in their eyes, at the teachers who had never really seen her before tonight. Taking a deep breath, Maria stepped to the microphone. "I studied at the National Conservatory in my home country," she said softly, her accent more noticeable now. "For many years I performed with the National Symphony and taught at the university." A murmur of amazement spread through the crowd. Principal Winters looked stunned. "But there was political trouble," Maria continued, choosing her words carefully. "My husband wrote articles for newspapers that made the government angry. We had to leave quickly. There was no time to bring papers, certificates, proof of my education." She paused, the memory still painful after all these years. "In America, without documents, I could not teach or perform professionally. So I found other work." The gymnasium was utterly silent now. Every person there understood the implications of her simple statement, understood that the woman who had been cleaning their rooms and hallways had once stood on much grander stages. "My husband died 3 years ago," Maria added quietly. "But I stayed here. I made a new life." Principal Winters cleared his throat, visibly moved by her story. "Well, Mrs. Gonzalez, I think it's safe to say that your talents have been severely underutilized at Riverside High." This drew a laugh from the audience, breaking the emotional tension slightly. "We'll have to see what we can do about that." He turned back to the audience. "Let's have another round of applause for Mrs. Gonzalez." The ovation was even more enthusiastic this time. As Maria bowed again, she caught sight of Miss Peterson slipping away backstage, her shoulders hunched and her face unreadable. The remainder of the talent show continued, but it felt anticlimactic after Maria's performance. The teachers who followed her on stage seemed almost apologetic as they presented their more modest talents. Maria sat in a chair backstage, still trying to process what had happened. Teachers she had never spoken to before stopped by to congratulate her, to express their amazement, to ask questions about her musical background. When the show finally ended, the crowd dispersed slowly, buzzing with excitement about the unexpected highlight of the evening. As people filed out of the gymnasium, Maria made her way to the maintenance closet to retrieve her uniform and bag. She had just changed back into her regular clothes when she heard footsteps approaching. Ms. Peterson stood in the doorway, her face composed now, but her eyes troubled. For a long moment, the two women looked at each other in silence. Finally, Ms. Peterson spoke. "I owe you an apology," she said stiffly. "I made assumptions that were incorrect." Maria nodded, accepting the words without comment. "Where did you study?" Ms. Peterson asked, a professional curiosity overcoming her embarrassment. "Your technique is exceptional." "I told the truth on stage," Maria replied simply. "The National Conservatory. I had many good teachers." Ms. Peterson nodded, then hesitated as if wanting to say more. Instead, she merely turned to go, pausing in the doorway. "You play Chopin better than I ever could," she admitted quietly, then walked away before Maria could respond. As Maria gathered her things and prepared to leave, Principal Winters appeared, still looking slightly dazed by the evening's events. "Mrs. Gonzalez," he said warmly, "I wonder if we could meet in my office on Monday. I have some ideas I'd like to discuss with you." Maria smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. "Of course, excellent." And he hesitated. "Thank you for sharing your gift with us tonight. It was truly remarkable." The school was nearly empty by the time Maria walked to her car. The night air was cool and fresh, filled with the scent of spring flowers. As she drove home, she felt different somehow, as if a weight she had carried for so long had finally been set down. Her apartment seemed smaller than usual when she arrived, or perhaps it was just that she suddenly felt bigger, more substantial. She changed into comfortable clothes and made herself a cup of tea, replaying the evening in her mind. The standing ovation, the tears in people's eyes, the looks of respect and admiration, the weight of invisibility lifting from her shoulders, and most importantly, the feeling of the music flowing through her again after so many years of silence. Maria slept deeply that night, without dreams of disappearing pianos or empty concert halls. Instead, she dreamed of new beginnings, of possibilities she had long ago stopped considering. Tomorrow would bring questions and decisions, but tonight she could rest, knowing that she had finally been seen, truly seen, for who she was. The weekend passed in a blur for Maria. Her phone, usually silent except for occasional calls from her sister in California, suddenly came alive with messages and calls. Mr. Rivera had shared her performance on social media, and overnight the video had spread through the community. Local news stations were calling, wanting to interview the janitor pianist who had stunned everyone at the high school talent show. Maria declined most of the calls. The attention made her uncomfortable. She had spent too many years trying to be invisible to suddenly seek the spotlight. But she did answer when Mr. Patel called to tell her how proud he was, and when Mrs. Chen from the cafeteria invited her to Sunday dinner with her family. "My daughter plays piano too," Mrs. Chen explained. "Just a beginner. But after seeing you perform, she practiced for 3 hours straight on Saturday. You've inspired her." The thought that her playing had inspired a young girl brought tears to Maria's eyes. It reminded her of why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. Its power to move people, to connect hearts across all barriers. Monday morning arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze. Maria went to work at the grocery store as usual, but everything felt different. Customers who had never noticed her before now stopped to talk, mentioning the video they had seen. Asking about her background, Mr. Patel finally had to shoo them away so she could finish stocking the shelves. "You're a celebrity now," he teased. "Maybe I should start charging for autographs." Maria laughed, but she felt a twinge of anxiety about what awaited her at Riverside High School that afternoon. Would things be different there too? And what did Principal Winters want to discuss with her? She found out at exactly 3 o'clock, when she arrived at his office as requested. Mrs. Diaz, the school secretary, greeted her with a warm smile, a change from the polite but distant nods of the past. "He's waiting for you," Mrs. Diaz said, leading her to Principal Winters' door. "And may I say your performance was absolutely beautiful." "Mrs. Gonzalez, my husband cried and he never cries." Principal Winters rose from his desk when Maria entered. gesturing for her to take a seat across from him. To her surprise, Ms. Peterson was also in the office, sitting stiffly in a chair by the window. "Mrs. Gonzalez," Principal Winters began, his voice warm and enthusiastic. "First, let me say again how extraordinary your performance was on Friday night. We've been talking about little else all weekend." Maria smiled politely, waiting to see where this was leading. "The thing is," he continued, leaning forward, "it seems to me that we have an incredible opportunity here. Your talent is, well, it's world class, and to have you just cleaning floors—" He shook his head. "It feels like a waste. A terrible waste." Maria tensed slightly. Was she about to lose her job? It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills. And finding new employment at her age wouldn't be easy. Sensing her concern, Principal Winters quickly added, "I'm not suggesting we don't need your services as a custodian, but I wonder if you might be interested in taking on an additional role here at Riverside." Ms. Peterson cleared her throat. "We've been discussing the possibility of expanding our music program," she said, her tone professional but less sharp than usual. "Specifically adding piano lessons for students who can't afford private instruction." "Exactly," Principal Winters nodded. "The talent show raised enough money to fund a modest scholarship program. We could offer lessons to deserving students who otherwise wouldn't have access to quality music education." He looked directly at Maria, "And we were hoping you might consider being their teacher." Maria's heart skipped a beat. Teaching again. After all these years. The idea both thrilled and terrified her. "I have no certification," she reminded them. "No papers." "We're aware of that," Principal Winters acknowledged. "Ms. Peterson has suggested that you could work as her assistant, under her supervision officially, while she helps you navigate the certification process. It might take some time, but there are pathways for professionals with your unusual circumstances." Ms. Peterson nodded stiffly. She didn't look entirely comfortable with the situation, but there was a grudging respect in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "The position would only be part-time to start," Principal Winters continued. 3 afternoons a week. You could continue your custodial duties in the evenings if you wish, or we could adjust your schedule. The pay for teaching would be better, of course." Maria sat quietly, taking it all in. After years of hiding her talents, of living a small and careful life, she was being offered a chance to reclaim a piece of her old identity. It was everything she had dreamed of and everything she had feared. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Of course," Principal Winters replied, "but I hope you'll consider it seriously. Those students would be very fortunate to learn from someone with your experience and talent." As Maria left the office, Ms. Peterson followed her into the hallway. The music teacher seemed to struggle with what she wanted to say, her usual confidence absent. "I meant what I said about your Chopin," she finally offered. "It was exceptional." She hesitated, then added, "If you decide to teach here, I would be interested in learning from you as well." "Your interpretation of that ballade? I've never heard it played that way." Maria nodded, surprised by this unexpected olive branch. "Thank you." As Ms. Peterson walked away, Maria felt a strange sense of possibility opening up before her. The future suddenly seemed less fixed, less predefined than it had just a few days ago. That evening, as Maria cleaned the school, everything felt different. Students who had always looked through her now smiled and waved. Teachers who had never noticed her existence stopped to chat. And when she reached the music room, she found a note taped to the door in Ms. Peterson's precise handwriting. "Piano available for practice until 8 p.m. M. Gonzalez." Inside, the grand piano waited, its lid open, inviting. Maria set aside her cleaning cart and sat down on the bench. This time there was no fear, no sense of trespassing. She belonged here as much as anyone. She began to play, not Chopin this time, but Bach, whose ordered patterns had always helped her think clearly. As the familiar notes filled the room, Maria weighed her options. Taking the teaching position would mean stepping out of the shadows, becoming visible in a way she hadn't been in years. It would mean opening herself up to questions about her past, to potential disappointments, to the complicated politics of school systems, but it would also mean reconnecting with the part of herself that had been silenced for too long. It would mean making a difference in young lives, passing on what her own teachers had given her so many years ago. When she finished playing, Maria had made her decision. The following September, As summer heat gave way to the first hints of fall, Riverside High School opened its doors to a new school year. Among the changes was a small sign on a door near the music room. Piano Studies M. Gonzalez, instructor. Inside that room, a baby grand piano, donated by a local music store that had heard Maria's story, gleamed in the morning sunlight. Around it stood 5 keyboards for student practice. On the walls hung photographs of famous pianists, including several from Maria's home country, part of her effort to share her cultural heritage with her students. Maria's first class of scholarship students arrived promptly at 3:30. 5 teenagers from diverse backgrounds, all with talent but without the means for private lessons. They entered nervously, eyeing the instruments with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. "Welcome," Maria said, her voice warm and confident in a way it hadn't been in years. "Today we begin a journey together." Over the next hour, she assessed their skill levels, assigned preliminary exercises, and shared the story of her own first piano lesson as a child. By the end of the class, the initial awkwardness had given way to enthusiasm. One boy lingered after the others had gone, his fingers still tracing patterns on the keyboard. "Mrs. Gonzalez," he said hesitantly, "do you think someone like me could ever play like you?" "For real, I mean." Maria looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just a student but a person with dreams and doubts and untapped potential. "With hard work and heart," she told him, "you can go beyond what I can do. Music has no limits except those we accept." The boy's face lit up with possibility, and Maria felt something expand in her own chest. This was why she had said yes to Principal Winter's offer. This moment, this connection, this passing of the torch. Later that evening, Maria still went through the school with her cleaning cart. She had decided to keep her custodial position for the evening shift, partly for the extra income but mostly because she took pride in the work. The rhythms of cleaning were soothing after the emotional intensity of teaching. As she moved through the quiet hallways, Maria reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. From acclaimed performer to invisible cleaner to teacher once again, life had a way of coming full circle, though never exactly back to the beginning. In the music room, she found Ms. Peterson still working late, preparing for the fall concert. Their relationship had evolved into an unusual friendship, built on mutual respect for each other's knowledge. Maria had helped Ms. Peterson with her Chopin technique. Ms. Peterson had helped Maria navigate the complexities of American educational bureaucracy. "How was the first class?" Ms. Peterson asked, looking up from her sheet music. "Good," Maria replied. "They have potential," Ms. Peterson nodded. "Well, they have the right teacher." As Maria continued her rounds, she thought about all the paths not taken, all the turns her life could have made. If she hadn't fled her country, if her husband had lived, if she hadn't taken the job at Riverside, if she hadn't touched that piano, but here she was, not famous anymore, not performing in grand concert halls but doing work that mattered in more ways than one. Teaching young people who reminded her of herself as a girl, cleaning spaces where learning happened every day, building a life that honored both her past and her present, and most importantly, no longer hiding who she was or what she could do. No longer invisible. That night, as Maria drove home under a sky full of stars, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the simple, profound joy of being fully herself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, students to teach, floors to clean, music to play, but she would face them as the complete person she was always meant to be. Sometimes, Maria thought as she pulled into the parking lot of her apartment building, the most beautiful music comes after the longest silence.